I gotta say about the Atlanta Falcons. Ever since that 28-3, yeah, we all remember 28-3, right? Ever since that happened in Super Bowl 51, they've been in a tailspin. The Falcons organization has been in a complete tailspin. And in recent times, Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff, that head coach and general manager tandem, they were fired during the 2020 season. And the Falcons during that season went 4-12, and there was a lot of uncertainty in that organization at that time. So in came Arthur Smith. He was a former offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans and kind of responsible for helping Ryan Tannehill turn his career around. And then as general manager, he was a former assistant GM of the New Orleans Saints, Terry Fontenot. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So both were coming in and inheriting a team just went 4-12, but they had a lot of decisions to make all around. The most important decision that they had to make was whether to keep the status quo going or to blow it up and rebuild. Well, they kind of went in the middle, and I don't know if that's a bad thing, but they didn't really make much progress in 2021. So going into the 2021 season, looking at last year's offseason, they took step one of trying to do something. They traded away longtime receiver Julio Jones to the Tennessee Titans, but they couldn't get past a step two with addressing their aging quarterback, Matt Ryan. And I don't know if it was due to loyalty or they just couldn't find a suitor for him. So they were over the salary cap in 2021 in that offseason. But it was indicative of, they were just kind of in a purgatory because they had to stick to assembling a roster that was primarily just a lot of 1 and 2 year deals as a result. So they really couldn't address anything more long-term and more pressing to their needs, like the offensive line and the pass rush and maybe an extra receiver for Calvin Ridley. So there was a lot of things to address for the Falcons in 2021, but they couldn't do it because, well, the salary cap was up against them. Money was tight in Atlanta. In the draft, though, they did get at least a playmaker for Matt Ryan. They used the 4th overall pick in the 2021 draft to select Florida tight end Kyle Pitts. But people were wondering about that pick because, rather than instead of drafting a quarterback to develop and for Matt Ryan to mentor, they selected Kyle Pitts. He's a talented tight end, but then, questions persisted about whether Atlanta should have went for a quarterback. Even though Trey Lance had went off the board to the 49ers just one pick earlier, there was still Justin Fields. There was still Mac Jones available on the board for Atlanta to take. It could have been, I think it's the first draft in NFL history, it could have been for 4 quarterbacks straight to go off the board right away. But the Falcons didn't do that. They went with Kyle Pitts. So they had, I guess, some faith behind Matt Ryan to, try to make something out of nothing with this roster. So going into 2021, this Falcons team boasted a roster poised for yet another mediocre or perhaps even an even worse season than the last. But I gotta say, this Falcons team actually overperformed. They kind of overachieved with such a crappy roster. They went 7-10, and I gotta say, Matt Ryan, he was a pretty solid quarterback, despite the lack of reliable receiving options outside of Kyle Pitts, and he also had a late breakout receiver in Russell Gage. Pitts showed off a lot of flashes of athleticism. He had some nice catches too, good running ability. He only had 1 touchdown in that Jets game in London, but he's gonna get better over time. And once whenever the Falcons decide to ship off Matt Ryan, he's gonna get even better with the right quarterback. And then Russell Gage eventually turned into a go-to option, especially when we'll get into it later. But when Calvin Ridley wasn't available, Russell Gage turned into a solid, reliable option for Matt Ryan late in the season with his versatility. And then perhaps the team MVP, Cordarrelle Patterson, I hope I'm pronouncing his first name right, he stepped up big. He really shined as a hybrid wide back, in which is the term that Deebo Samuel's been using, a running back wide receiver hybrid. He pretty much was a two-role player. He was the cog that in Arthur Smith's offense. Defensively, corner AJ Terrell took a big step as an effective shutdown corner. Good awareness of the ball, good immediate tackling. Probably the only highlight of that defense. But then there was a lot more problems for the Falcons. And the reason why they lost 10 games. In all honesty, they won 7 games because, well, they were facing a lot of teams that were as bad as them or even worse than them. But the 10 games that they lost most of them were against playoff contenders. Most notably, when you attribute these losses, their best remaining receiver, Calvin Ridley, left mid-season to focus on his mental health, and it's good. I guess it's a good thing that he left to focus on his mental health. But man, when he left, that Falcons offense was left in a rut. So, as we'll discuss a little bit later, who knows if the question was whether Ridley was going to return at all on this later in the season or at all beyond. And then the entire defense wasn't good at all. They couldn't stop the run. They had no pass rush. There was no viable depth at any position, especially corner and safety, aside from AJ Terrell. So that defense was pretty bad. And then offensively, aside from the lack of reliable receivers, the offensive line really struggled to protect Matt Ryan. So as a result, they got blown out by playoff opponents that, well, were in the playoffs, like the Cowboys, the 49ers, the Bills, the Patriots, who actually managed to shut out the Falcons on a Thursday night game. So, like I said, they actually managed to luck into 7 wins. Again, against teams that were just as bad or worse than them. So, with the Falcons, nothing went terribly wrong for Atlanta in 2021. They just were a really talented team. They didn't really have any standout names outside of Kyle Pitts, AJ Terrell, Cordarrelle Patterson, and I guess Matt Ryan. I mean, he wasn't the greatest, but he wasn't the worst quarterback. He was just okay. But then again, you have to wonder if he's really worth keeping around in 2022 or even beyond that. So for the Falcons 2021, they went 7-10. They weren't terribly bad. They weren't terribly good either, or like really good either. They were just lacking in a lot of areas, like talent-wise, and a lot of it had to do with their money situation, and especially reared its ugly head against quality opponents. So the thing is, though, they still remain in the same spot. They still remain in the same spot that they were last offseason. Rough salary cap situation and some uncertainty regarding Matt Ryan, now added with Calvin Ridley in the mix. There are some questions that have to be asked about both of them. Because with Calvin Ridley, when is he going to come back to play? When is he mentally ready to play in the NFL? And if he is it going to be with the Falcons, or is it going to be with another team that the Falcons are going to trade him to? So you have to wonder about when Calvin Ridley, and if Calvin Ridley is going to play this season, or probably even beyond. As with Matt Ryan, as I'll discuss again in the team needs for the Falcons, he has a big ass contract extension for a quarterback that honestly his play is kind of it's not regressing that bad, but it's just wondering if it's really worth keeping. So going into the offseason, the Falcons are over the cap, but not that much. $6 million minus $6 million. Some of their key free agents are Cordarrelle Patterson, Russell Gage, and edge rusher Dante Fowler. They are slated to pick at number 8 in the draft next month, but they have to address a lot of things. Like I said, they have to do something about Matt Ryan's hefty contract, if Matt Ryan is a candidate for a restructure. But man, he has a big ass cap hit in the next coming weeks. 48 freaking million. That is way too much. It's way too much. Like, how are the Falcons gonna do anything in free agency? How are they gonna get players to even come? Even if it's a short-term deal, how are they gonna spend on anything in free agency? So the front office has to somehow manage to redo his deal to avoid such a big cap hit. And if they do, they did something right. But otherwise, man, you're gonna have a tough time trying to compete in 2022. And you're also gonna have a tough time re-signing Cordell Patterson. And after his big season, Mr. Krabby Patty is gonna be looking for a big payday. And if Atlanta wants to possess at least a somewhat better offense in 2022, they're gonna have to find some way to re-sign one of their key pieces. And yeah, they're gonna have to find some money to do it. We have to look into adding some quality pieces in the defensive line, and I think this is where they do it in the draft, because I don't think they have the money to do it in free agency. And they should do it because, well, they didn't pressure the passer at all this season, and they failed to stop the run because, well, they were talent deficient all around, especially in the defensive front. They need to sign at least one or two quality pass rushers. Actually, not sign, but draft that can bring the heat in 2022. So for the Falcons, we knew they weren't going to be a playoff contender. They're probably not going to be a playoff contender in 2022. But in 2021, with the roster that they had, with the short-term players that they had, they overperformed. Like by week 15, when they faced the 49ers in pretty much a de facto elimination game for the Falcons, they were still in contention at that point, like late in the season. So they went 7-10. I mean, kind of overachieved too. But now they have to figure out how to get better in 2022. But they don't have any money to speak of. Again, thanks to Matt Ryan's heavy cap hit. And then I also forgot to mention Julio Jones's previous contract. So with all things considered, with their cap situation and the money, yeah, the Falcons' feathers in 2022, it could be as ruffled as it was in 2021.